welcome back, everyone. Today we wanted to talk about Dubai post-war, during war, however we want to phrase it. As we're recording, it's not technically over.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we wanted to, I guess, a couple of things. Dispel some of those myths that you're definitely being hearing outside of the UAE, but also, I guess, giving some realistic kind of on the ground, like what we're seeing, what's happening, and also going back to that like kind of main question of like, should you still be considering the UAE as a place to set up your business or to put your personal wealth, etc. So, yeah, why don't we start with, I guess, what's happening now? I mean, I guess the lay of the land as we record is that we've got this what seems to be very loosely adhered to ceasefire,
Yeah.
and hopefully, from what we can see, it does seem like both sides are trying to work towards, some kind of deal. And then I guess that's when we're really going to see what the aftermath looks like, right? Because at the moment, everyone's still a bit, what's going to happen? What's the next step's going to be?
The city is very quiet at the moment, right?
It's quiet, I would say, though, from a tourist perspective. It's still busy from a work perspective.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. If you're a resident here, business is here, it's life as normal, but the city from that external.
Yeah, from a tour. I mean, I was in a restaurant last night and it was rammed, like absolutely rammed. So I think but that was not that was in a kind of residential area, if you want to call it that. It wasn't like in a hotel restaurant or what have you. So I think you're right that from a tourist perspective, we're still seeing a lot less tourists. But from a day-to-day perspective, it's still very busy.
Absolutely. But hopefully that'll change. Like, hopefully once, not if, but when this Middle East conflict is officially done, like hopefully tourism will just snap back immediately there and then, and it'll be interesting to see how that transpires.
I mean, from my perspective, I know a few people from the UK, and the reason they're not coming is not because they don't want to, it's because the UK's issued a don't travel or whatever notice, which means health insurance.
And British Airways still aren't flying here.
Exactly. Right? Yeah. Not that I would fly them anyway. But, so I think there's some of that, like, it is a bit nerve-wracking for someone if they come here and they've got no travel insurance or health insurance and something happens to them, not even related to the war, but just in general, and they wouldn't be covered. So I think if the war ends and that, kind of travel ban, if you want to call it that, is lifted, I think you will see a lot of people flock back.
Absolutely. No, I mean, there's no two ways about it, right? Like, obviously, it's been a fairly unsettling time. I've stayed here for the entirety since the conflict kicked off. I think you traveled to South Africa and you've been out and around a little bit, but there's no two ways about the fact that the UAE dealt with it tremendously well. The conflict was thankfully almost in its entirety contained to the skies with interceptions of missiles and drones. Life on the ground wasn't disrupted. So that's been very, very impressive. And like I say, we've stayed here and life has been safe. But it's more that external impression just makes people, I guess, question or almost second guess how stable is the UAE, and it's re-brought the focus on the fact it's still a country within the Middle East, which is known to be an unstable region for hundreds of years.
Yeah. And I think that's the other funny thing about this is people are so shocked that this conflict is happening, and then you think, like you say, when you actually think about the location of where we are, like it's always, I say always, but for a long time, it's been a region of
instability,
and uncertainty and whatnot. And the UAE's done a very good job over the last however many years of dispelling that myth. But there's always going to be that risk.
So the focus for our viewers is, what is the impact from a financial planning, a capital hub, and an ongoing investment point of view?
And again, we said about this before we kind of came on air, as it were, like, a lot of this is personal preference, right? For some people, I've got clients that are still moving here, they're still planning their moves. We're still going through the company and corporation stuff where, everything's going normal. And then I've got a couple of other clients where, one guy had a property, he's got a UK business. He used some of the excess profits to invest in property out here. He's decided to sell that property. He doesn't live here. He's been here a couple of times on holiday, but he's kind of like, do you know what, with the, the situation, I'm not. So I think it is still very much a personal preference, as to, whether or not you see this as an area that will, once this conflict is over, will kind of
Yeah.
go back to where it's gone. The other thing I think to say is like, whatever people think, they do have a lot of money here.
Yeah.
So, in terms of being able to support, banks or institutions or whatever, there's plenty of cash to be able to do that. So, we're not talking about like a country like the UK, which is significantly in a deficit all the time. We're talking about a country that has, still a lot of money and a large sovereign wealth fund. So I think for me, I think it would need to be quite a long conflict for them to really be worried here on the ground.
Yes, absolutely. And there's still oil in the ground, right?
Exactly.
Oil's still gonna, like, they're not gonna ever run out of money.
And part of the reason why they've left OPEC, which is effectively like the oil cartel, if you like, of majority of the countries that are in this part of the world. Part of that reason is there is restrictions on how much they can ship.
Yeah.
And they have capacity to ship more.
Yeah.
So, part of their, I guess, recovery plan is, well, we've had to ship limited amounts due to the conflict. We want to be able to ramp that up.
Yeah.
So we're going to leave OPEC so that we can ramp that up rather than be limited to what we can supply. So they haven't left because there's not enough. They've left because they've got more and they're allowed to. Do you know what I mean? Absolutely. So there's plenty there for them to.
Yeah, for sure. So do you believe that Dubai, Abu Dhabi, DIFC, ADGM are still good jurisdictions to set up a foundation if someone is exploring the wealth planning options and opportunities? Should they consider that and take it as seriously as maybe they did 6 months ago?
I mean, for me, 100% still. I think you feel
absolutely
the same. Again, they don't have to physically live here necessarily. There are, we can have a structure in place, and it doesn't require, 100% of the time residency. So, and at the end of the day, this conflict will end. Whether that's in a month, whether that's in 6 months, whether that's in 2 years, whatever, it will end at some point. Conflicts always end.
Yeah.
They don't last for forever. So I think that's the other side. It's like, even if right now you're kind of like, don't want to live there at the moment. I said this to someone the other day, right? We're all as human beings, we're very good at forgetting what happened, right? So take COVID.
Yeah.
When COVID was going on, everyone was like, we're never going to do in-person stuff. We're never going to shake hands. We're never going to do this. We're never going to do that. And then, like, as soon as COVID was over, everyone started doing everything that they said they weren't going to do during COVID, right? Because you forget and you go back to your norms. And I think it will be the same, here, especially in the UAE, where they have built such a strong kind of outward image. I do think that people will quite quickly forget and just go back to normal,
Yeah, for sure. My question was more from a legal and structural perspective rather than a relocation perspective. And my mind naturally goes like, there could be a conflict, and there is a conflict, but does it actually impact the piece of paper, the charter and the bylaws of your foundation that says your foundation is registered in this legal framework or this legal jurisdiction, which is ADGM or DIFC? It's like, it doesn't matter really what's happening. Like there could be a war in Dubai today, but it's not going to impact that piece of paper, right? And just because you have the legal structure is primarily based here doesn't necessarily mean the assets have to be here. Some of the assets may be here, but the majority, if you've got any sense, you will have diversified anyway, will be all over the world. And that's just part of good, logical financial planning and diversification, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think, the only reason I guess I link it back to kind of residency is, we do have in the kind of tax world, we do have, rules around setting something up somewhere and not living in that place. And therefore, the center of interest of that entity becoming elsewhere. So you've got to be a little bit careful, I think, in some instances, that you don't just set up here and never and think to yourself, I'm never going there because it's a war zone. That would be a little bit more, it's not impossible, but it's a little bit more tricky. Whereas, if you are a bit more kind of like, look, I'm not going to come at the moment, but if this is over in the next couple of months, maybe 3-4 months after that, I'll come.
Yeah.
I would still go ahead today with your setup. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And like I said, we've got clients that are doing that right now.
Yeah, for sure. And let's not forget, for these high net worth individuals, geographical mobility, like you say, whether it's to leave until the conflict is done and then come here down the line, or financial geographical ability, which is they've got multiple bank accounts in multiple jurisdictions, they're really agnostic to the surrounding and the global geopolitical situation,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because they understand that there's volatility in the world, there's conflict in the world, nothing is stable or static ever for very long. And they have built the right framework that allows them to adapt and continue to move, shift, protect, and pivot as the world around them changes.
Yeah, you know, we talk about at the moment we're talking about a kind of war conflict, right? But you know, you take some other jurisdictions, and Europe is a big example of this. And you know, even Switzerland. I was chatting to a Swiss guy the other day, and you know, he said even Switzerland's kind of going down this route. But you know, the government in those jurisdictions at the moment, they're very anti-business. They're very anti-wealth generation. You know, all these sorts of things. So, like, actually, whilst you may not have a war zone in the UK in terms of missiles over your head, like you have a bit of
There's
a
other
war.
risks, right?
Yeah, and there's a war with the government, if you want to call it that, in that they, you know, at the moment they're very anti-business, they're very anti-wealth generation. So do you really want to park your assets somewhere, or base yourself or what have you in a place that's anti-growth, you know? So I think that's the other side to this is, you know, people think, oh, there's some missiles, therefore it's the worst place in the world. The other side to that is, have you seen what's going on? You know, and you know, probably shouldn't talk about it quite like this, but like there's been more deaths in the UK that I've heard about for loads of different reasons, whether that's some psychopath running people over on the streets, whether that's, you know, some guy driving down the road and stealing someone's watch and killing them in the process. Like there's been more of those than there have been deaths
Yeah,
from,
of course.
you know, from missiles over here. So, you know, again, I'm not trying to play it down. I'm just trying to make it kind of a bit more realistic that, like, you know, wherever you are in the world, there are problems of some kind.
And it's about having the foresight to
Exactly.
structure your wealth and give yourself the optionality before it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
And I've had conversations with a lot of people who use Dubai as an example, but it's anywhere, is, you know, all of their bank accounts are here, their whole life is here, their family setup is here, and all of their investments are in property, for example, which is an obvious Dubai example, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you've got zero diversification. You are entirely exposed to this one region.
Yeah.
And this one region is a great region and it's typically very, very stable, but something unexpected happens and you've got a big problem.
But that would be the same if they had all their assets in the UK.
Exactly.
And then the UK has a recession.
Yeah, exactly. And then HMRC decide that you've misfiled your tax return and they freeze your bank accounts and they come after you with a big investigation and you find yourself in a very difficult situation. So it is about, I think, if you didn't have the foresight to diversify geographically and have multiple options at any one time ahead of this, it has really highlighted the absolute need and requirement to do that.
Yes. And I think that, you know, kind of comes back to what, you know, the point of this kind of channel we're trying to do here is to educate and to help people to understand, you know, not what they should do, but what, like, I guess that kind of, like I said, I don't want to say what they should do because we're not here to advise people specifically, but, you know, just give that kind of foresight to think about these things.
Yeah.
You know, not necessarily give you the decision, but to go, why not have a think? And that's what this kind of episode, if you like, about as well, is it's not saying put all your money in Dubai. It's also not saying take all your money out.
Yeah,
it's very much a case of like, understand what's going on, think about it logically.
Yeah.
But what's very clear is, and I've had this for 2 ways. One, people telling me, but also I've been in Europe, especially over the last few weeks. But you know, and the anti-UAE rhetoric, the anti, you know, the UK did quite a lot of anti-rhetoric during the start of the war, and they were very much. There was a couple of politicians I'm sure you saw, and they were like, "Oh, all these tax dodgers that now want to come back, we should tax them the moment they come in." And you know, you think about all these things, and you go, first of all, a lot of people don't move just because of tax, right? I actually did a post on this on my LinkedIn over the last couple of weeks. Like, you know, tax isn't always the driving factor.
No.
Like, it actually genuinely wasn't the driving factor for me. It was a factor. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't, but there was other factors.
Of course, yeah. It's not the only factor.
Yeah. So, you know, so that's the first thing. But secondly, surely when this sort of shit happens, you want to make sure that you entice these people back, right? But instead, they were like,
them and lock them out.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's such a
classic.
Weird, it's such a weird political standpoint, and I think that's the other issue that a lot of people, especially ones that are here, you know, yeah, we drink the Kool-Aid and all that sort of stuff, but I think also you feel respected, you feel looked after. Whereas in the place like the UK, a situation like this happens, and the first thing that they can say as politicians that's supposed to look after us, is pay up.
How do we charge them? How do we make money from this?
It's just mental.
Hilarious.
So I think that's the other thing is like just bringing that awareness, bringing that is it perfect? Would we rather that there weren't missiles over our heads? Absolutely, but actually in the main, and I think some of the things that have been the most disruptive is like schooling and stuff like that, right? Because kids have had to be at home, and so I think some things like that have been quite disruptive. So I know a few families that have said, you know what, we're gonna go back to the UK, say, for this period, just so that we've got stability with the kids at school, and then when this is over, we'll come back. Which again, totally fine if that's your view. So yeah.
And on that note as well, like, people have left, but their intention for the most part is absolutely to come back. And you've mentioned the disruption potentially to the schooling side of things there, but as we said at the start, life on the ground has very much been business as usual. And so far, the global market has been incredibly resilient. Property is, again, the obvious example and most in-your-face example. And transactions have slowed naturally. But at the moment, there hasn't been a huge move in property prices. Now, it's still early days. Property is a very slow transacting asset class, and it will take time for the data to reflect the true impact. But at the moment, it has been fairly resilient. My concern from an investment standpoint is more the tourism impact on property. And there's an abundance of short-term Airbnb rentals, and people have invested in property purely for the purposes of that. It is more if that tourism takes a lull, and I don't think other governments and authorities around the world have done a great job to strengthen other people's impression of Dubai, obviously taking advantage of this situation. That might just create a bit of an impact, for example, post-summer. But for now, like we said, it's life is on the ground as usual.
And I agree with that. Property does take a longer time to, if Trump tweets something today, especially my favorite thing, crypto, is going up or down immediately, depending on what he said, right? That's how quick that market moves. Whereas, property is the other end of that, and it does take a lot more time. I think for me, there's two sides to it. There's the investment side, which I agree with you. I said earlier, I've got a client who sold an investment property, and I understand why he's taken that decision, and I respect that, decision that he's made. But I think what you got to remember as well is, and I'm looking at this as a buyer myself as well, right? In this market, if people aren't leaving, which in the main, most people aren't, I know one, maybe two people that have left, like in terms of like that have got families that I wouldn't have expected to leave, right? People are always coming in and out. We all know people that are always in and out. But in terms of like, they've upped and left, I only know a couple of people. And I think that's the other thing at the moment that hasn't affected the property prices in the stuff I'm looking at, because I'm looking at a family home. I'm looking at something, to live in.
Yeah, much less speculative corner of the market.
Yeah, and there's less people selling those because they're still here. So they're still living in them, and therefore those side, from what I've seen, that hasn't really been affected. But I totally agree. If you were buying somewhere on the Palm, a penthouse on the Palm for, to rent out to people. Yeah, I totally agree that is going to take a slump naturally.
Yeah.
And obviously we've got summer, which, as of recording, we're in, end of May. It's unlikely that people are going to start coming back in their droves over the next 3 months when, it's like 40 degrees out there today.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. If the war ends tomorrow, the tourism industry is still going to feel the pain for the next 4 months until the usual October time.
Yeah. So that's not going to help either, if that makes sense. So,
no, it'll compound it.
Yeah. So I think that's the thing to think about is and it comes back to all these kind of core principles. What are you doing? Why are you doing it?
Yeah.
What's the main motivation for doing it? Are you doing it? Where's your cash at? Do you have, surplus cash? And therefore this is not speculative, but this is an investment that you're willing to take.
Yeah. Are you over leveraging yourself in the hope to make a quick buck off the hype that has been Dubai property for the past 4 or 5 years? In which case, you're probably going to get your fingers burned because you're buying the speculative corners of the property market here.
Absolutely.
Or are you buying a long-term family home to live on for the next 10 years? Well, even if the property market, even if that particular unit collapses 20% tomorrow, who cares? You're living in it for 10 years.
Exactly.
It's truly irrelevant,
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's always coming back to those core principles of what you're doing and why you're doing it, and where are you at? And that doesn't matter whether that's UAE property or investing in stocks or whatever.
And living somewhere, focusing on the investment side of things, as we've said, and the purposes of this episode, it is to highlight is diversify, right?
Yeah.
you know, if you want to go and buy a speculative UAE property, by all means, go and do it. You might make great money, but don't put all of your money into one corner,
Absolutely.
one asset.
Absolutely.
And as long as you're sensible, again, it doesn't matter. You can absorb the volatility. It's when people start to lose sight of what sensible, disciplined investing looks like that they get their fingers burnt.
100%.
Yeah, there's a link in the comments below. Just go on that. So there's more information on Joe and myself. And there's also a contact form on there as well if you want personal, private consultation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.